Live from the SABC's Auckland Park studios, welcome to this Freedom Day edition of the Watchdog. My name is Zanim Vula, and here's what we have in store for you tonight.
We are not where we want to be, and many people today will be saying, what is this freedom worth? Yes, they are right to ask themselves that question. What are we celebrating? Yes, they are right to ask that question. But we have achieved much.
President Ramaphosa gives his government's take on freedom 28 years into democracy.
It will take a brave generation to restore the dignity of our people. And that generation, it's you.
His political parties, opponents I should say, also gave theirs. And so too do many South Africans across the length and breadth of our country. And in our big interview of the day, we sit down with a world-renowned South African novelist, poet, playwright, and academic, Professor Zakes Mda. All that coming up in tonight's episode of The Watchdog, which starts now. President Ramaphosa says while South Africans still face challenges, government has made significant strides in cementing the country's democracy. The president was delivering the keynote address at the official celebrations of Freedom Day in Middelburg, Mpumalanga. 28 years ago, the first democratic elections were held in South Africa. Ramaphosa highlighted government's efforts to improve the lives of South Africans under democracy.
Celebrating Freedom Day, it's been 28 years since the first democratic elections were held in South Africa. The president says, despite challenges faced by the country, South Africans should never let go of the taste of freedom. Delivering the keynote address at the Freedom Day celebrations, President Ramaphosa said the quality of life under democracy has improved compared to the apartheid era. He urged South Africans not to give up on democracy and freedom, as many perished fighting for it.
Despite the many challenges that we face today, challenges of unemployment, challenges of crime, challenges of gender-based violence, and many other challenges, despite all those many challenges, our people have tasted the fruits of freedom. The quality of life of our citizens has improved from what it used to be under apartheid.
Almost 3 decades later, questions have been raised about the seriousness of the democratic government on the land issue. The president says government is doing all it can to reverse the legacy and injustices left by the apartheid regime. He also assured South Africans that government continued working hard on the land redistribution issue.
In Free South Africa, we have recognized the injustices of the past and are implementing a program to restitute and to redistribute land to those who were dispossessed of their birthright. The land issue is still a burning issue amongst many South Africans, and we are addressing it. The South Africa of today is democratic and open.
And a firm warning to looters. The president lambasted any attempts to loot and misuse relief efforts meant to assist residents of KwaZulu-Natal after the floods that devastated the province. Earlier this month, the province saw floods that left over 400 people dead, displaced many others, and destroyed key infrastructure.
We need to ask ourselves what type of a nation we want to be. We have seen, even in KZN, as our help has been delivered to those who need it most, where some of our people have gone out to start helping themselves even when they did not need to do so. And some who have been pilfering and even stealing that help. And we have seen how, as a nation, we have been getting involved and getting sucked into all this type of behavior.
On the recent attacks on foreign nationals, the president urged people to refrain from attacking their fellow Africans. He conceded that South Africa has an immigration crisis that is crippling the country's economy, but says this cannot excuse acts of violence against foreign nationals.
Let us take a stand against those who want to sow division and anarchy in our communities by prosecuting nationals from other African countries. If we have evidence of criminal activity, let us report those to the police, and we should not take the law into our own hands.
The president says South Africans should work towards unity and that the domination of one group over another should never happen in South Africa again. He also cautioned government officials to deliver on government's promises as this advances the progress of democracy. Nhlanhla Khatlhane, SABC News in Middleburg, Mpumalanga.
For the country's rural poor, there's very little to celebrate. That's according to DA leader John Steenhuisen, who today chose to visit KwaBhaca in the Eastern Cape, where he led his party's Freedom Day commemoration event.
The reality is many communities like this are still shackled with poverty, with lack of access to supplies, and with a crippling rising cost of living, which is driving people further into poverty. I mean, to hear some heartbreaking stories from people who've been waiting for almost a decade for housing delivery, water that's promised never appears, municipality comes and starts building a borehole, never finishes it. Many of the people have got to walk very long distances. And our point is, you cannot have freedom while people are trapped under the yoke of poverty in this country.
In 2022, Freedom Day is not worth celebrating, according to EFF leader Julius Malema, who, among other things, highlighted the plight of South Africa's young people, many of whom remain unemployed despite making the effort of obtaining educational qualifications.
Out in their numbers to celebrate Freedom Day, these EFF members gathered to highlight the importance of having an economically thriving democracy. But party leader says this year's Freedom Day is not worth celebrating, as many people in South Africa continue to live below the poverty line. He says this day is supposed to be a significant day across the country, but millions of people who have no access to basic services have no reason to celebrate their freedom.
Today is supposed to be a day we were supposed to celebrate because we've got our land back. Today was supposed to be the day we celebrate because our youth are working. Today is the day we're supposed to celebrate because each and every South African has got a decent house. Today we're supposed to celebrate because each and every house has got clean running water.
Malema says he'll continue to make sure that South African judiciary is not captured by politicians in any way.
No judge must be controlled by a politician. Judge must be independent. Judge must be sober-minded. Judge must apply only the law, nothing else. Whether one rata or one rat, listen to what the law says.
Malema says the issue of land expropriation without compensation is not yet over. Now EFF leader Julius Malema has called on these party members to go all out and make sure that by December this year the party has got 1 million membership. It remains to be seen whether or not this call will be heeded by these EFF members who have gathered here. Abongile Dumago, SABC News, Mamelodi, Pretoria.
For the African Christian Democratic Party faithful, the day was about drawing attention to mandatory vaccinations and the proposed new health regulations, which party leader Kenneth Meswe says are draconian and should be opposed.
This year's Freedom Day celebrations come at a time when government has embarked on a massive vaccination campaign and encouraged citizens to get their jab to curb the spread of COVID-19. But the ACDP is not of that view. The party made its way to the highest court in the land in defense of what it calls people's constitutional rights and freedoms. It has joined the fight against the draft health regulations.
It's about our future, the future of our children, the future of our grandchildren, the future of generations to come. So we must stand for our rights. We must defend our rights. Vaccinated or not, we say, if it is your choice, enjoy it. I don't want it and I will never get it. My children don't want it, they will never get it. And no devil is going to force it. Hear me well, I say, no devil is going to force it on me. No devil is going to force it on my family.
Meswe further added that it would be an injustice for any church to demand mandatory vaccination from its congregants.
Now, things like this, all right, that pastors must tell members who come to church, I want to see your vaccination certificate before you are allowed in church. Only those who will betray their calling will do this. Only those who will betray their calling will do this. All right? We will never. And all those whose churches are not accepting them because they are vaccinated, come to foster us. We have a church there that will allow everybody.
The Department of Health has been taken to court by Action for Freedom, and the ACDP has joined their bid as friends of the courts. They accuse Health Minister Dr. Joe Phaahla of giving the public too little time to comment on the draft health regulations, which they label as draconian. Despite the latest extension, the party says the Act provides that a period of 3 months must be given to the public for comment in promulgating legislation.
Now, the reason why we were in court yesterday, the reason why we will continue to be in court is because there is a plan to annihilate, to kill, to destroy, and mess up everything that speaks to the humanity of who we are. But also incarcerated because people are gathering.
The ACDP has warned that it will fight any decision by government to take decisions relating to the management of the pandemic out of local hands. This follows an agreement at a special session of the World Health Assembly on the need to draft a convention or other international instruments for pandemic preparedness and response. An intergovernmental negotiating body has been established to draft it under the constitution of the World Health Organization. Natasha Piri, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Well, it wasn't just politicians that SABC journalists tracked today. Some of our colleagues spent the day away from the big rallies, but on the ground with South Africans as they shared their lived day-to-day experiences of freedom. About 25 beneficiaries of land claimants who operate at the Mabunda citrus farm in Shitlakati village outside Giyani in Limpopo say delays in receiving deeds for their land hinders them from accessing funding. Mabunda Citrus is one of the province's successful black-owned restitution farms, which also periodically hosts government's graduate employment program. Pimani Baloyi has that story.
The Mabunda Citrus farm was handed over to 30 black farmers in 1998. Following years of teething problems, the farm currently has 50 permanent and 20 seasonal workers on its payroll. It produces oranges, lemons and grapefruits on 275 of its 300 hectares of land. The farm also periodically houses unemployed graduates as part of the President's program aimed at giving graduates work experience. Some graduates who have been on the farm for 7 months as part of the program say it has been life-changing.
This program has helped me a lot in terms of income because I was not earning anything. I was unemployed, sitting at home, doing nothing. But this was a great opportunity for me because I managed to change few of things at my home.
Us as youth, we are really suffering because it's really hard for us to get employment. You know, you go to the universities and study, but not be able to have employment. So I think they should really put it as the first thing on their list that youth are struggling out there.
The knowledge that I've obtained so far, I can be able to run citrus farming. I don't have any doubt. The experience now that I have, I am very thankful.
The land claimants say they've had to get into a joint venture agreement as they struggle to source funding without a title deed.
We cannot just talk about a freedom, even if you see that we don't have access to get to the bank and get a finance ourselves. So if we want to finance, we rely to somebody. So I think to me that is not a freedom. We're not yet in the freedom. Because when we get to the freedom, I was able to go to the bank and we lend the money and then we pay back the money. So, but when you go to bank, you want to borrow money, they will ask you that do you have a title deed.
The farm exports its produce to Russia and other European markets. Russia's invasion in Ukraine has affected their export market as produce that had already been packaged for Russia could no longer be exported. Biman Paloi, SABC News, Chitlakati outside Guyana.
The youth of the small town of Oogi in the Eastern Cape are calling on government to help them realize their freedom by working on social upliftment. The area faces a number of socio-economic challenges, such as high levels of unemployment and an alarming rate of gender-based violence. The provincial government has celebrated freedom in that area.
The youth of this area feel rejected by authorities. They say job opportunities are given to those who have political connections.
We submit our CVs and receive no feedback. We are victims of nepotism. Most of us are languishing at home. With qualifications, we don't have jobs.
Some of us are not 100% in terms of...
He says some of them are not 100% in terms of school. But they are good in sports, but there are no opportunities for them to showcase their talent, and they don't even have jobs. The provincial government celebrated this day by honoring Xhosa poet John Knox Bokwe, who built a number of churches and schools during the 1900s.
So those are the things that when we celebrate, we need to look into as to how do we amend that. But it doesn't mean that we are wasting money for remembering the sacrifice that the forebearers have done for us.
The government has committed to address the issues raised by this community. Abongile Yankees, SABC News, Oogi.
From the Eastern Cape to the Northern Cape, residents of Galeshewe in Kimberley say escalating crime in the area is depriving them of their freedom of movement and the right to safety. They say there has been an increase in serious crimes since a community anti-crime group stopped operating there. The group suspended its work earlier this year after a foreign national was reportedly killed during one of their operations.
The entire community of Galeshewe doesn't feel safe.
It's a common refrain from residents of the Northern Cape's oldest township the last few weeks. Robberies, break-ins, stabbings and assaults have increased, they say. They blame the escalating crime on drugs and alcohol.
There's a lot of crime there. People up, there's boys who are hijacking, hitting people with roofing their cell phone. You see, they're not happy. And the rapist in Kimberley is too high.
The biggest worry is violence against women and children. There have been 2 cases involving preteens in the last month. 11-year-old Relebagile Segami was raped and choked to death on March 30th. Her body was found in the bushes behind the Northern Cape Legislature building, while another man was caught allegedly as he was trying to rape another 11-year-old just a week later.
We are really broken, but we have to accept what is done. But we are actually wanted to ask actually the justice system. The justice must be served for our little girl. And as Relebagile is going to rest, it really breaks our heart as a family.
Residents want more police visibility in the area as well as a strong criminal justice system.
Let government, and more especially the police force, the police services, let them implement or come up with a strategy so as to can fight these criminal activities, because it's too much now.
Galeshewe enjoyed relatively peaceful times when the anti-crime group patrolled the township. Residents hope they will soon be able to take to the streets again, and that they will feel safe to enjoy their freedom of movement. Ulrich Hendricks, SABC News, Kimberley.
Two female building contractors from Knysna in the Western Cape are paving the way for other women in the male-dominated construction industry. Nozuko Kameni and Nondutuzelo Yalezo have been awarded contracts to build RDP houses in the Greater Knysna municipal area. Both started from humble beginnings and now own their own big companies. They hope to inspire other women to also pursue careers in construction.
From mixing cement to hauling bricks, these women have built hundreds of homes between the two of them. They're the first group of local contractors to build double-story homes in Knysna. With a keen interest in building and having undergone training, they've now cemented their space in the industry in spite of the challenges.
Kuba undingumama ndisebenza nabantu abangotata.
Because I am a woman working with men, it's always as if I cannot do something. It's only them as men that are capable. Meanwhile, as a woman, I can build a house from scratch to the roof.
They're encouraging other women to join the industry.
They must stop looking down on themselves. They can do it because I'm here today. I'm doing it, so they must not undermine themselves. They must not think they are women. They can't. They can.
Supporting local businesses, the local municipality says it's seen the courage, determination and pride these women have in their work.
We are proud at what the women have actually done up to now, especially the two women. They have been performing quite well. The houses they have been developing are quality houses. If you get an opportunity to look at what they have developed, you will see that they actually are within the standards that are applicable.
Taking her building skills even further, Kameni has constructed a fire-resistant biomass house from alien trees, which she hopes will be the future of building in Knysna. Segwi Chetty, SABC News, Knysna in the Western Cape.
After the break, our big interview of the day, one-on-one with world-renowned novelist, poet, playwright and academic, Professor Zakes Mda. You can tweet us your questions and comments or just be part of the conversation. The Watchdog SABC and at Vuyo_Mvogo. With no less than 30 books under his name, novelist, poet, playwright, and academic, Professor Zanim Vula Kizito Gajeni Mda. Brazaiks, Rotman Yasayeshele, good evening.
Hey, kunjani man?
I'm well, thanks, and how are you, Brazaiks?
That's all right.
Good to have you back in the country as well. We are going to talk about some of the things you've been doing over the past few days. But I want to start here. I mean, on a day like this, you know, Freedom Day, and at a personal level, perhaps, what does the word freedom, even the mere mention of it, evoke in Zaiksimda?
Well, it evokes quite a lot, especially for a person like me, who was born the year apartheid was introduced. In other words, the Nationalist Party won the elections that year, and the first thing they did was to introduce part of the legislation that later became known as apartheid, those groups of laws. So I was born with apartheid, and I lived most of my life with apartheid. I became part of the freedom struggle, fighting against apartheid, using various weapons, including culture, including art, writing plays which were banned, my book of plays, We Shall Sing for the Fatherland, and other plays, was banned by the apartheid government, and all of which speaks to the lack of freedom during those days. Freedom of expression, for instance. So I've experienced, that period, which means that this day, for me, means celebration, because that's the day we got free. But it also, of course, reminds us that, just as Mr. Ramaphosa was saying to us here, we are not where we want to be. So it also reminds us that we should always remember that, yes, we did get our freedom. We got free from the shackles of the apartheid regime. And there were expectations, high expectations, many of which have not been met. So there is disillusionment, as should be expected. Many people are disappointed because we failed to get where we should be, or even where we want to be. Some of the expectations were created by us. In other words, they were much higher expectations that we created than any reasonable situation or any reasonable political situation would have done. Let me give you an example. I remember I was sitting in Vermont in 1994 during that very first campaign for our very first elections. I was listening to Nelson Mandela talking to a group of women and children who were sitting there, and he was walking among them, and he said, all of you here, you will have your own houses. Each one of you will have a house. Now, of course, you might say this was just campaign speak, But people took that to heart, that, now we are free. We are, all of us, even those little babies who were there, each one of you we will have a house. So you see, people come with those high expectations already told to them by politicians. We couldn't have reached those expectations that we created. No government could ever reach that expectation in the world. We shouldn't have made such promises. But even those that we should have made or we should have kept, we did not keep them, because there was avarice, for instance, that set in, that culture of wanton accumulation, and our politicians, our leaders were involved. There was that culture of impunity that was cultivated in the whole society, to the extent now that we see that in many respects, in many places in the country, the state is absent. Wheels are coming off in various fields of life. And when the state is absent, of course, we know that nature does not allow any vacuum. The state will be replaced by other entities, other individuals, some of which will be outside the realms of the law. And in fact, we find that we'll be moving very close or towards anarchy. That is my biggest fear now.
So many things you've raised in that opening statement, Brazek, and I want to pick up on a few. When you talk about the expectations that were created by us, as you put it, has it been for lack of trying that those expectations have not been met?
Well, leaving aside the fact that some of the expectations that were created, some of the promises were extravagant. I mean, the mere fact that you can promise that little girl there that she's going to have a house. I mean, we knew even as we were making that promise that things won't work like that. So besides the fact that some of these were extravagant, there are many attempts that we did that were good, but that failed along the way because of avarice. For instance, I can tell you that I've been to informal settlements where I work with people there in various developmental projects that I sometimes get involved in. I've been to shacks or the informal houses, let me put it that way, where you'll find that there is a bulb hanging there. It means that the government has done its best to supply people with electricity, even in those remote informal settlements. Now that's a good thing. But you'll find that that bulb is just hanging there. It's not functioning because there is no power that goes into that house. No, long before load shedding. This has nothing to do with load shedding. It has to do with the fact that, yes, I have electricity, but I'm unemployed. I cannot pay for it. And therefore, that bulb that is hanging there is just for decoration. You see? So you see, there's this wonderful thing there which you can look at as success. The government is supplying electricity and so on. But of course, there's the negative that electricity is not there. The government has supplied it, but it's not there because people cannot pay for it. Because why? Because they don't have money. They are unemployed. So you find that employment is the key thing, that people want, even more than just handouts. People want to work for themselves and have a better life. You see, people want jobs.
On the avarice that set in, that you've referred to a couple of times now, do you think that perhaps we were way too trusting of the people who were midwives, so to speak, who were in charge from the time of ushering in a new order in 1994, and we only woke up when it was perhaps way too late and the problem was way too big for anyone to deal with in the time that we were now all awoke?
Well, yes, we were too trusting, but we were right to be trusting. You see, remember, these were freedom fighters, many of them, of course. Not everybody who jumped into the grave had been a freedom fighter before. Others are people who just hijacked this thing towards the end, you know, when they saw, oh, now we are going to be eating. But many of those, you know, the core people were freedom fighters who sacrificed families. It was not nice to go to exile, leaving your loved ones back at home and so on, or to go to prison. So we saw them as heroes, people who sacrificed their lives, their families for us. And then look here, we have achieved then that freedom. And then of course, we let them run with it because we were trusting, rightly so. But one thing good about us though, is that we did not keep silent. That's one thing about South Africa that will continue to give you hope. They are going to elect you today, South Africans, whether you are ANC or whoever you are. The next day, when you do something they don't like, they will demonstrate against you. In other words, we are a very vocal society. We state our grievances immediately to whoever. We did not behave like in our fellow African countries where their leaders, you know, became so big-headed and there was this megalomania and they became demigods, you know. We did not deify our leaders. That's a good thing. We did not deify our leaders. We spoke truth to power immediately. And this applies across the board. So that also gives hope that people will continue to fight for their freedom. Freedom now from who? From the ruling elites, you see, who have forgotten about the people and are busy accumulating, you know, wanton wealth. That gives us a lot of hope. But there are many other things that continue to give me hope. Civil society organizations, for instance. We have very strong civil society organizations. We also have very strong media. I know that media is always left out. People don't talk about the press or anything like that. And in fact, when they talk about the press, it's very negative. The press has done a lot contributing to this freedom that we have today. Many of the corruption, for instance, that we became aware of, so that today we have the Zondo Commission and things like that, was exposed by who? By the media, especially the print media, you see. A lot was exposed to that. That's another pillar that gives one hope. The fourth pillar is the judiciary. We still have a highly respected judiciary in the world. And we hope things will stay that way. So these are pillars, the four pillars that give one hope.
In fact, I mean, picking up on that very last point, the judiciary gets criticized, and I heard, from a couple of speeches today that came through by people who say it still needs transformation. Others went on to allege that it is being captured. And this is an important point for me on the back of what you said earlier about the fact that where the state becomes or is absent, you then, nature allows no vacuum. You then get people who invade the space for all the right and wrong reasons. And I remember listening to an interview earlier in the day. Someone was saying, actually, it's a good thing that there are people who call themselves social movements, even political parties calling themselves social movements. But where do we draw the distinction? How do we determine whether a person comes, with all the good intentions, and someone who just wants to exploit, the situation for their own selfish interests?
Well, first of all, you say that the judiciary is criticized. Oh yes, it should be criticized. Just like all the other branches of our government should be criticized when criticism is due. You see, there is no branch that will go scot-free. But of course, like all criticism, it must be supported by facts, you see. Not just by wishful thinking. But, today I've won the case and therefore the judiciary is wonderful. Oh, now the next day I've lost the case. Therefore, the judiciary is bad. When facts are presented, then of course we'll listen to you because you are supporting what you are saying. The judiciary is rotten because here is the evidence, A, B, C, D. We are open-minded. We won't say, no, you can't criticize the judiciary, keep quiet. We want to hear those facts. As for the second part of your question, you see, what usually happens, because now we are really talking about the intentions. The intentions may be good. In South Africa, we have a history of good intentions. In the olden days, in Alexander Township, when I was a little boy and a youngish man, I say youngish because I'm still a young man, a youngish man, there emerged a gang which became known as the Msomi gang. Some of you may remember Msomi. Some of you may remember people like Shadrach Matthews and so on. This group started, in fact, as a vigilante group. Now, vigilante, by the way, is not a bad word, you see. I'm going to read the definition of vigilante. Vigilante, a member of a self-appointed group of citizens who undertake law enforcement in their community without legal authority, typically because the legal agencies are thought to be inadequate. So this group then in Alexander Town started as a vigilante group because the law enforcement was inadequate. It was apartheid law enforcement. And they were trying to fight criminality in Alexander. But as time went on, they themselves became the criminals. They became the most feared gang. Why? Because, you see, nothing was controlling them. Power goes to your head, Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. They terrorized the people of Alexander for a very long time. That is why even today we remember. We remember also the Wetduke in the Cape.
In the Western Cape.
Many of the groups that started as groups that wanted to enforce law or laws in their community, then they turn into criminals themselves. That's the problem with the good intentions in the beginning, but as time goes on, you find that power has gone into their heads and they have become criminals themselves.
I just want to ask you a couple of quick questions because we are running out of time in the few couple of minutes I have left, but about things that speak to your work and books and writing. In the first one is in 2001 when you gave the second annual Biko Memorial Lecture. You spoke of, and I quote, raising consciousness poetry, which you described as self-empowering poetry performed by young, conscientized South African poets, the children of Biko, as you called them. 28 years into democracy, where would you locate the children of Biko? Are they still at the margins?
Well, the children of Biko are still at the margins by and large. But the children of Biko have risen up. Many of them have decided that they are not going to sit down, fold their arms, open their mouth, and hope that manna from heaven will fall into their mouths. I've seen many young people in South Africa who have taken things into their own hands and in all aspects of life are creators. Whether you are talking of young entrepreneurs coming with their labels and their brand names and so on. I'm wearing some of the shoes right now, Batu, Drip, what, you know. Whether it's Makhosa out there with a label that is international, in demand, whether you are talking of the people themselves, human resources, the people who have conquered the world in Hollywood, in the world of opera, the Pumeza Machikizas, the Pretty Yendes, you see, all over Europe, you find that those children of Biko are out there conquering the world. So it is one of the hopes that one has that these children of Biko will take us to freedom.
And in addition to, the freedom of speech, that the president spoke about today, in addition to, themselves, taking their own initiatives, but also, a very, I would say, healthy and growing book culture in South Africa, where more and more South Africans are writing, are expressing themselves, we're influencing each other in more ways than has ever been the case before. What can we still do? In other words, what have you learned from other jurisdictions? You're well-traveled. You are now based in the U.S. What have you learned from those jurisdictions that helps grow the things you have just spoken about?
Well, surprisingly, I'll tell you that I've learned from this jurisdiction even much more than I've learned from those other jurisdictions that think that they are so advanced that, they've got it all. Here, for instance, you talk of writers. Even writers have taken things into their hands and are participating throughout the value chain of the book trade. Some writers have established their own publishing houses, the Zugiswa Vanners, the Sipiwo Mahalas. Some even own printing presses where fellow publishers print their books. The Angela McCall, for instance. Some have taken book selling into their own. They don't wait for some bookstores to sell their books. They go out there to sell their books. The Fred Kumalos, the Nick Mhlongos. You see, you find that these are part of the bigger children I was talking about.
Yes.
Where self-reliance, in other words, fighting against the dependency mentality. They say now, we are not going to depend on the government or on this chain of bookstores. We are going to be self-reliant. We are going to do things for ourselves.
Okay. Prosaics, we've run out of time. Quick one, 2 seconds. Marvoster says, please ask him to consider a sequel or prequel to The Outstanding Little Sons. That novel is so relatable. Are you going to do that?
I will. For you, I will.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time, Brazek Sumta, novelist, poet, playwright, academic, our guest for this evening. And that's our Freedom Day special for you to join us again tomorrow evening, same time. Have a good night and enjoy what's left of your Freedom Day.